The village of Nyanza lay nestled between the vast savannas and sacred mountains that kissed the sky. The golden sun rose each day, illuminating the fields and huts, a sign that life, though hard, would continue. The villagers spoke of the mountains as guardians of their land, a symbol of the ancestors' eternal watch. In a modest hut at the edge of the village, Kweku sat hunched over a dry patch of earth. His hands, calloused from years of toil, rested on his knees as he stared at his barren field. The drought had lasted 3 seasons, and the once fertile soil now cracked beneath his feet. "This land has betrayed us," Kweku muttered, his voice heavy with despair. Amma, his wife, knelt beside him, her face calm but resolute. "The land is not at fault, my husband. The ancestors test us. They wish to see if we will endure." Her words carried the steady strength of one who believed in the unseen forces that shaped their world. Kweku sighed. "How much more must we endure, Amma? The children go hungry, the debt to Tunde grows, and I have nothing left to give." Amma placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You have us, Kweku, and the ancestors never abandon those who seek their wisdom. Do not lose hope." Her gaze turned to the mountains. "The rain will return. We must remain faithful." In the village square, the air buzzed with Tunde's arrival. His brightly colored robes shimmered in the sun as he greeted each villager with exaggerated smiles. "Friends, it seems I have returned just in time. The drought may take your crops, but I bring grain and salt to sustain you. At a fair price, of course." The villagers murmured in a mix of relief and resentment. They knew Tunde's kindness came with a heavy cost. Those who could not pay would owe him favors, and Tunde was not a man to forget a debt. Kweku avoided Tunde's gaze when the merchant approached. "Ah, Kweku," Tunde said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You look troubled. Perhaps I can lighten your burden. A loan, perhaps? Pay me when the rains come." Kweku's jaw tightened. "No, Tunde. I have nothing left to offer you." Tunde leaned closer, his smile hardening. "Everyone has something, Kweku. You should consider this carefully." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Kweku with a knot of fear in his chest. As the sun set, Kweku sat outside his hut, his mind racing. Amma's voice floated from inside, singing a hymn to the ancestors. He closed his eyes and tried to find solace in her faith, but the weight of his debt crushed him. An idea took shape. Desperate and foolish, he would tell a lie, a single lie to buy time and protect his family. In the darkness, Kweku whispered to himself, "I will say that I have found the golden talisman." The next morning, the village buzzed with whispers. "Did you hear? Kweku has the golden talisman? The one blessed by the ancestors?" Kweku's lie spread like wildfire, and soon villagers approached him with offerings, baskets of fruit, tools, and promises of labor. Amma frowned as she watched the stream of visitors. "What have you done, Kweku?" she asked, her tone sharp with concern. "I have done what I must to keep us alive," he replied, avoiding her eyes. But the lie did not stop there. Tunde, hearing of the talisman, approached Kweku with a cunning smile. "So, my friend, it seems you have been blessed. I will take the talisman as repayment for your debt." Kweku's heart raced. "The talisman is not for sale," he said quickly. Tunde's smile vanished. "Then I suggest you reconsider. If you value your family's safety, you will bring it to me. As Kweku watched Tunde walk away, his hands trembled. He had woven a lie that now bound him tighter than any debt. The talisman, which had never existed, now loomed over him like a shadow, and the ancestors' silence felt heavier than ever. Kweku's hands trembled as he stood in the center of the village square, his voice echoing against the mud brick walls of the huts. "I have been blessed by the ancestors," he announced, his tone steady despite the storm in his chest. "I have found a sacred talisman, a golden gift from the spirits of the mountains. It is said to bring prosperity to all who honor it." The villagers gasped, their eyes wide with awe and curiosity. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "A talisman? Truly blessed," one elder murmured. Kweku nodded solemnly, his mind racing. He hadn't meant to let the lie grow so quickly, but now he was trapped in it. The desperation that had driven him to speak those words had now rooted itself in the hearts of the villagers. The next morning, neighbors began arriving at Kweku's hut. A woman carried a basket of ripe bananas. "For you and your family, Kweku," she said. "May I see the talisman, even for a moment?" A farmer placed a bundle of firewood at his doorstep. "My crops have failed, Kweku. Perhaps the talisman could bless my field." Kweku felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. "The talisman must not be handled carelessly," he lied, his words catching in his throat. "It is sacred and requires time to work its power." Inside the hut, Amma watched silently. That evening, as the village quieted and the stars emerged, she spoke. "Kweku, what have you done?" Her voice was calm but firm, like the roots of an ancient tree. "I did what I had to, Amma," Kweku replied, avoiding her gaze. "Would you have me watch our children starve? The talisman gives us hope, even if—" He hesitated. "Even if it is a lie?" Amma finished, her eyes piercing through his defenses. "The ancestors see everything, Kweku. They do not bless deceit. This will not end well." Kweku said nothing, but her words stayed with him. Each offering, each whispered plea from a neighbor, felt like another stone added to the burden on his back. Days later, Tunde arrived at Kweku's hut, his smile as sharp as a knife. "So, my friend, it seems you have been favored by the gods," he said, his voice laced with mock sincerity. "This talisman of yours, surely it is powerful enough to settle your debt?" Kweku stiffened. "The talisman is not for trade, Tunde. It is sacred." Tunde chuckled, leaning in closer. "Sacred or not, it can pay what you owe. I suggest you think carefully, Kweku. The ancestors may forgive debts, but I do not." As Tunde walked away, Kweku felt the noose of his lie tighten. That night, under the dim light of a flickering oil lamp, he began carving a piece of wood. His hands worked feverishly, shaping it into a small figure. He coated it with the remnants of gold paint he had saved from a festival long past. When the work was done, he stared at the false talisman. It glittered faintly in the lamplight, a hollow creation born from fear and desperation. The following day, Tunde paraded through the village with the talisman hanging around his neck. "Behold, the gift of the ancestors," he cried, his voice booming. The villagers gathered, murmuring in amazement as he recounted how the talisman would bring him great fortune. But fortune did not come. Days later, the skies darkened with storm clouds, and a fierce wind swept through Nyanza. The rain was not the life-giving kind. It destroyed crops, flooded homes, and left livestock sickly and weak. The villagers whispered among themselves. "The talisman has brought a curse," one said. "It has angered the ancestors," another replied. The whispers grew into shouts as the villagers marched to Kweku's hut. "Kweku," they called. "Explain yourself. What have you done?" "Kweku?" they asked, relieved that they could speak in private. Only they knew the truth of their rebellion. Kwekwekwe stepped outside, his face pale and drawn. The crowd surged toward him, their voices demanding answers. The lie he had sown had grown into a storm, and now he stood at its center, unable to escape. The sun hung low over Nyanza, as the village square filled with voices, each carrying a question, a demand, or a curse. At the heart of the square stood the sacred circle, a ring of polished stones, where matters of great importance were debated. Essie, the village elder, stood in its center, her staff raised high, commanding silence. "My children," Essie began, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "The ancestors are restless. Misfortune has fallen upon Nyanza, and we must uncover its source." Her eyes swept over the crowd, heavy with the weight of authority. "Kweku, step forward." Kweku shuffled into the circle, his shoulders hunched under the weight of guilt. The crowd parted for him, their eyes filled with suspicion and anger. "Tell us," Essie said, her tone steady but firm. "This talisman you claim to possess, does it truly exist, as you say?" Kweku's throat tightened. His gaze darted to the faces around him. Ama's eyes, brimming with worry, the scornful glare of Tunde, and the hopeful yet wary expressions of his neighbors. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. "Answer the question, Kweku," Essie commanded. At last, his voice broke free, trembling with shame. "It is not real," he admitted, his words barely above a whisper. "The talisman, it was a lie I told to protect my family, to escape the debt I could not pay." A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a surge of angry voices. "You deceived us," one man shouted. "You brought this curse upon us," another cried. Essie raised her staff again, and silence fell, though it was heavy with tension. "Enough," she said. "Yes," Kweku lied, "but he is not the only one to blame. Who among you did not seek to profit from this lie? Who did not bring offerings, hoping for blessings from the talisman? The greed of one may plant the seed, but it is the greed of many that waters it." The villagers shifted uncomfortably, their anger turning inward. Essie continued, her voice now solemn. "The ancestors demand atonement. Kweku, you must face their judgment. Tonight, we will gather at the sacred baobab to seek their will. Until then, prepare yourself." That evening, the villagers gathered beneath the great baobab tree, its twisted branches reaching skyward like supplicant hands. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and the hum of ceremonial drums. Kweku knelt at the base of the tree, his head bowed. Essie stood before him, her voice carrying the gravity of tradition. "Kweku, you will confess your sin to the ancestors. You will ask for their forgiveness and accept whatever judgment they deem fit." Kweku nodded, his voice steady as he spoke. "Ancestors, I have wronged you and my people. I allowed fear and desperation to guide me, and in doing so I brought harm to our village. I beg your forgiveness." As the ritual unfolded, Tunde stepped forward, his face a mask of righteous indignation. "Essie," he called, his voice sharp. "How can we trust his words? What if he stole the talisman from the sacred mountains? Perhaps it was his greed, not his fear, that led to this calamity." The crowd murmured, confusion spreading like wildfire. Essie's eyes narrowed. "Tunde, do not sow discord where we seek peace. If you have proof of your claim, present it now." "I need no proof," Tunde countered. "His actions speak for themselves." The villagers, already on edge, turned their anger back to Kweku. Voices rose, calling for punishment. "Kweku must pay. He has brought ruin upon us." The crowd surged forward, their rage drowning out Essie's attempts to restore order. Amid the chaos, someone struck Kweku, and then another, until the frenzy consumed them all. By the time the mob dispersed, Kweku lay motionless at the base of the baobab. A hush fell over the crowd as the realization of their actions sank in. Essie knelt beside Kweku, her face etched with sorrow. "The ancestors weep for what we have done this night," she said softly. "We have not only lost a man, but we have also lost our way." The villagers stood in silence, their heads bowed, the weight of their guilt settling over them like a shroud. The drums, once vibrant and loud, now faded into the stillness of the night. The morning after Kweku's tragic death, a somber silence fell over the village of Nyanza. The sun rose as it always did, casting its golden light across the savannah, but the air carried a weight that no breeze could lift. Villagers gathered in small groups, whispering prayers and sharing glances of guilt. The sacred baobab, beneath which Kweku had fallen, now stood as a grim reminder of what their rage had wrought. Amma, draped in a simple cloth of mourning, stood before the tree. Her face, though lined with sorrow, held a quiet strength. She raised her hands, and the villagers turned toward her, drawn by the calm authority in her presence. "Brothers and sisters," Amma began, her voice steady despite the tremor of grief beneath it. "We have lost a man who was flawed, yes, but who was also one of us. Kweku lied, but his lie did not grow in a void. It grew because we fed it, with our greed, our fear, and our mistrust." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others lowering their heads. Amma continued, her voice rising with conviction. "When Kweku spoke of the talisman, many of us sought to claim its blessings. We offered gifts, not because we believed in his wisdom, but because we hoped to gain something for ourselves. This lie, it was not his alone, it was ours." Tears glistened in her eyes, but her gaze remained firm. "The ancestors saw all of this. They watched as our greed consumed us, and as our anger destroyed him. Let us not forget this pain, for it is a lesson we must carry in our hearts." Essie, the village elder, stepped forward, leaning on her staff. Her silver hair caught the sunlight, and her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the crowd. "Amma speaks the truth," she said. "We cannot undo what has been done, but we can seek the forgiveness of the ancestors. Tonight, we will gather here to perform the rite of reconciliation. Only through humility and unity can we begin to heal." That evening, the village assembled beneath the baobab. The drums beat a slow, solemn rhythm, and the air was heavy with the scent of burning sage. Essie led the ceremony, her voice weaving prayers to the ancestors, calling for their guidance and mercy. As the flames of a ceremonial fire flickered, Essie addressed the crowd. "It is time to speak the truth, for the ancestors demand honesty." Her gaze fell on Tunde, who stood at the edge of the circle, his arms crossed. "Tunde, you have profited from this lie more than any other. Will you deny it?" Tunde's face tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. The villagers turned to him, their eyes narrowing as the weight of suspicion shifted. Finally, he spoke, his voice defensive. "I only did what any man would do to secure his survival. I did not force Kweku to lie." "But you knew it was a lie," Essie countered. "And still, you used it to enrich yourself. The ancestors do not tolerate such deceit." The crowd murmured, and Tunde's bravado crumbled. He fell to his knees. "Forgive me," he pleaded. I only wanted to escape my own struggles. I did not mean for it to end like this." Essie raised her hand, silencing him. "The ancestors are merciful, but they demand justice. Tunde, you must leave Nyanza. Your presence here will only sow further discord." The villagers nodded in agreement. As Tunde rose to leave, Essie spoke once more. "Let this be a reminder to us all. Dishonesty, no matter how small, can grow into a storm that destroys everything in its path." In the days that followed, the village began to heal. Under the baobab, they placed a plaque in Kweku's memory. It bore an inscription written by Ama. "A single lie, like a seed, can grow into a tree whose shade brings sorrow. Truth is the only light that can set us free." The rains returned, gentle and life-giving, and the crops began to sprout anew. The villagers worked together to rebuild what had been lost, their bonds strengthened by the lessons they had learned. And though the story of Kweku and the talisman became a tale whispered by the fireside, it was never forgotten. For in Nyanza, the ancestors' wisdom remained as enduring as the mountains, and as sacred as the baobab's roots. The village of Nyanza, once vibrant with the laughter of children and the rhythm of work, now carried the quiet weight of regret. The death of Kweku, a man who had lived and lied out of desperation, left an indelible mark on every villager. His tale became a whisper in every corner, a lesson they could not ignore. Under the wide branches of the sacred baobab, Ama stood, her frame straight despite the burden in her heart. Her voice, steady and clear, rang out like a bell. "This tree has seen much, just as the ancestors have seen much. What we witnessed with Kweku's lie was not only his doing, but ours as well. We were eager to believe because we wanted what was easy, not what was right." The villagers nodded solemnly, their faces etched with sorrow. One elder stepped forward, his voice trembling. "The talisman was not real, but our greed was. We let it take root and blind us. For that, we are all guilty." Ama placed her hand on the trunk of the baobab, its bark rough against her palm. "A lie is like a seed," she said softly. "Once planted, it grows, twisting into something that no one can control. Kweku may have sown it, but we watered it with our fear and distrust." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The crowd murmured their agreement, some wiping tears from their eyes. Essie, the wise elder, raised her staff and stepped forward. Her silver hair glistened in the sunlight. "The ancestors teach us through trials such as these. They remind us that truth, though often difficult, is the foundation of harmony. Let this lesson not fade like footprints in the sand. The villagers bowed their heads, and Essie gestured for them to gather closer. She spoke again, her voice filled with authority. We will honor Kweku's memory, not by hiding from the pain of his actions, but by learning from it. Here, beneath the baobab, we will place a plaque so that his story is never forgotten. The crowd worked together, shaping a simple yet beautiful plaque from stone. When it was finished, Ama, her hands steady, carved the words that would remain long after they were gone. A single lie, like a seed, can grow into a tree whose shade brings sorrow. Truth is the only light that can set us free. The plaque was placed at the base of the baobab, and the villagers stood in a solemn circle around it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting its golden glow across the tree, Ama spoke once more. Let this tree remind us that even in the deepest sorrow, we can find wisdom. Let it remind us to speak truth, even when it is hard. Let it remind us of Kweku and the price he paid. The villagers nodded, their hearts heavy but their spirits resolved. As they walked back to their homes, the drums began to play, a slow, steady rhythm of reflection and renewal. Though Kweku's life had ended in tragedy, his story would live on, passed down from elder to child, a lesson etched in the roots of Nyanza's history. For the baobab, standing tall and unyielding, became a symbol of wisdom, a place where truth and memory intertwined, ensuring that no lie, however small, would ever again shake the foundation of their village.